Can I introduce you to Hannah Lim? She is with LexisNexis, and maybe Hannah, if we could start with what your day job is.
Okay, so can you guys hear me? It's okay? Great. Okay, so yeah, I'm Hannah. Thanks for having me here. I'm with LexisNexis Legal and Professional, and I manage our rule of law projects in Southeast Asia. So, I mean, I like to joke that my title, Head of Rule of Law in Emerging Markets, is confusing for non-lawyers who don't understand what rule of law is, but it's probably even more confusing for lawyers who know what rule of law is, because how can somebody be head of rule of law? So it was a bit of an interesting job when I took it on. Essentially what I do is try to identify why and how rule of law is weak in the different Southeast Asian countries, and see what LexisNexis as a business, as a corporate entity, what we can do with our skill sets and our capacity and our capability to try and plug the gap and try and support justice systems in Southeast Asia.
Could you tell us what the rule of law means, or what it means to you?
Okay. So, I mean, for those of you who are legally trained, I don't need to explain it, but the rule of law essentially means that everyone's equal before the law, that it's not the whims of an individual or a particular group of people that decides what's justice or what gets done and what doesn't get done, but it is the law that applies equally to all situations and to all people. So in LexisNexis, we have a rule of law equation. So there are 4 components to the rule of law. First one is equality before the law, what I just talked about. Second one is independent judiciary. Third one, transparency of law. And the last one is accessible legal remedy. So all these components are necessary in order for us to say that there is rule of law within a particular community or society.
And what does it mean to go beyond legal minimums to advance the rule of law? Surely if you are subject to laws as a citizen, or in our case as representatives of a company, that's good enough, isn't it?
Well, I mean, I feel like, it's kind of like Batman, with great, was it Superman? With great power comes great responsibility. So just going beyond what, just following the law, the legal minimum. So I used to be a lawyer before taking on this role, and I learned very quickly that, companies aren't, bad guys that just want to go in and make as much money as possible. But what they're really doing is trying to figure out where is the line that I don't have, that I can't cross. And sometimes they ask, how close can I get to this line without getting into trouble? And that's, the legal minimum, right? But I feel like that focus is not productive. It's not helpful. Companies shouldn't be looking to where the line is. They should be turning around and trying to run away from that line beyond just the legal minimum and doing as much as we can to support our communities. And I think what we've seen here within this past day, we've really seen a lot about there needs to be a lot more collaboration. There needs to be a lot of different people working together. Partnership is one of the goals that we seek to achieve. And partnership doesn't come from enforcing a law. It's very difficult to mandate partnership, but it has to come with a genuine intention to work together in good faith, and that definitely goes beyond the legal minimum.
So I guess I should make transparent that we work for the same company. So I'm with Relix, the parent company of LexisNexis Legal and Professional. But it would be interesting to hear in Southeast Asia how you are approaching what you've been describing. How are you actually practicing going beyond legal minimums to advance this rule of law?
Well, it's very interesting. It's a bit unique to, I think, what LexisNexis does, although by no means not replicatable. Definitely, I think every corporation would be able to do this. But what we do is essentially try to leverage on where our strengths lie. So for those of you who don't know LexisNexis, we are a legal content solutions provider. So we house one of the biggest databases of legal content in the world, and then people access that content for research, either as lawyers or academic institutions or even government. So we have a few skill sets, right? Like we know how to handle large amounts of data. We leverage on technology to make our data accessible. So we know how to deal with technology. We have strong channels of distribution in different countries. So we try to leverage on that, on these different skill sets, to try and sort of, make the world a better place, I guess. So a concrete example would be in East Malaysia, we have been working with the mobile courts to sort of go into rural areas and to help with either teaching about the importance of registering your child at birth, because that's something that's based on the law. So we have a lot of legal editors who can sort of provide that information. And we've also been working with perhaps NGOs to try and make the laws more accessible, because we have a lot of the laws. We have legal editors who can translate that law into plain language, so it's accessible by the layperson, and then working with the NGOs to get that word out. So we've been doing that for NGOs that work with women and domestic violence to try and sort of enhance awareness of legal rights. So these are just a few examples of what we've done using our skill sets.
And what do you have coming up? For example, I know LexisNexis, Legal and Professional in Southeast Asia, has worked in Myanmar. Tell us a little bit about the work that's already been taking place and what you might have emerging.
So with Myanmar, it's quite a personal story for me, because I used to be a lawyer in Myanmar before joining LexisNexis. I'm originally from Singapore, but I just somehow ended up in that country, so it has a very special place in my heart. So with Myanmar, and I think this ties back to the theme on sustainable cities, I mean, one of the main issues there has been lack of transparency in data when it comes to information relating to housing and real estate, and I think that stems back a lot into being able to have effective urban planning and urban policy that's put into place. So we've been having discussions with some groups, and including some government officials, on whether or not we can come in and help support in sort of organizing that information, digitizing that information, and making it more transparent. On the face of it, it may not look directly related to law, right? But our approach to rule of law and our approach to access to justice we don't take a narrow approach to it, because at the end of the day, we see legal systems and the law in itself not as an end to itself, but as a means for something better. So it's a means for people to be able to lead better lives, to seek justice, to be able to have trust in the contracts that they sign, to be able to do commerce. And that's what the law essentially is. So when we went to Myanmar, our intention was to see wherever it is that we can help, we will try. And one of the things we've been looking at is supporting with e-government services. So looking at the housing sector and looking at housing information was something that came up, and so we've been pursuing that. I can't really go much into detail because we're still talking about, the arrangements and stuff with the government. So, yeah, that's what I can share right now.
And in the Maldives, I know that you've had some experience cataloging laws. So, what about that work? What's the purpose of it?
Yeah, so that was very interesting, because if you're looking at a country like the Maldives, that is a country that's comprised of many different islands, right? Like it's an island nation state. And in Southeast Asia, we have a couple of those too, the Philippines and Indonesia. And you can imagine that the difficulties that a government might have in trying to manage its population that's spread out over all these, very diverse physical space that's separated by large bodies of water, especially in an era where there is no technology, you didn't have the internet, would have been very difficult. So from an access to justice perspective, not having that infrastructure to be able to connect to different islands had an impact on access to justice. Some different courts on those different islands wouldn't know what the other courts on other islands, what kind of laws they were passing, what is the state of the law right now at any point in time. And even statute, when it was all sort of printed, was difficult to get across. So what we did at LexisNexis, we worked with both the Supreme Court and the Attorney General's office to consolidate all the laws and that speaks directly to transparency of law as that component within our equation. So transparency of law was something that we are able to do quite efficiently. It's kind of our day job. That's what we do on a day-to-day basis. So we were able to support the government in consolidating their legislation, making sure that it's up to date, and then teaching them how to keep it up to date on an online platform. So there were two aspects to that. We did the sort of the editorial work of consolidating everything, and we did the technology side of things to create an online platform so that it can stay up to date. So that's what we did in the Maldives. And the end goal of that was so that it would become more accessible and more manageable, therefore making the process more efficient overall.
And can you talk a little bit about other judicial actors like bar associations? Because I know LexisNexis Legal & Professional in Southeast Asia has been trying to support, for example, the International Bar Association, and in the case of Myanmar, providing engagement and interaction with members of state legal societies and learning from other practitioners. How does that play out?
Well, definitely in the realm of knowledge sharing. So we do have a very strong network of people in the legal community globally. They are both our customers, they are also our contributors. So we have a lot of authors who are lawyers and judges. And I mean, my sense is that the legal community tends to be very supportive of each other. We do like to sort of, see justice being done, and we do try to, engage in capacity building. So in places like Myanmar, Indonesia, or, anywhere really where we see that we could maybe bring together some experts, like for example in Myanmar, they've reached out to me to say, we are interested in learning more about legal research and writing. And of course we have authors that write textbooks on legal research and writing. And so being able to connect these two, there's a demand and a supply for this type of information. Being able to connect the two together, operating as a platform, keeping our eyes and our ears open to what the needs are and where the capacity is, and putting that together. It's something that can be done with very little effort. It just takes a little bit of being aware of what the needs are. And I guess, that's something that, I'd like to see more corporations being involved in, sort of like leveraging on the networks to be able to sort of bring about cooperation and partnership.
Well, a good example of that is something we've been doing at RELX, which you have been replicating in Southeast Asia, is the RELX Rule of Law Cafe. So if we give it a good name and we serve pastries, people will come. Or if we do them in the afternoon, in the summer, we serve a wonderful drink in the UK called Pimm's, and people especially turn out for that. But the idea is that, again, we can use the convening power that we have to bring different actors together. So internally colleagues, but also in the UK, we've had members of the UK Law Society, the International Bar Association, corporate peers, and what we do is we get together to share information. Yeah. And I think the first one we did was about just over 2 years ago, and the whole meeting was the introduction. So we just introduced ourselves to one another, and we talked about what our pain points are related to the rule of law. And actually, at our most recent gathering of the Rule of Law Cafe, our colleagues at LexisNexis Legal & Professional in the UK brought the idea of creating a legal resource, a kind of legal hub that we would develop for pro bono. So something that would be digital but have a practical offline application if you needed legal advice. And I don't know about trends, maybe you can tell us about Southeast Asia, but there's definitely been pressure on the provision of legal aid where it was perhaps more prevalent before.
Yeah, I think, and this goes back to the access to justice question, and it also goes back, I think, to having sustainable cities. Because cities are a place where you have people living very closely together and being very interdependent on one another. And you know, when you live very close to your neighbor, it's very easy to step on toes. It's very easy to sort of rub each other the wrong way, and that's where sometimes legal disputes might arise. And you don't want to be in a situation, well, you don't want to see a city where the person who gets his rights are the people who have, you know, more money or more wealth. So I think that's something that we want to try and address, the inequality when it comes to access to justice in cities. And I think acting as a platform, so you mentioned the Rule of Law Cafe, is a way to get different people who have similar interests and similar goals to come together and share resources, to sort of network and to sort of see what each other are doing and to see whether there is synergy there to be able to make their work more efficient. And for us, we typically, I mean, when we hold Rule of Law Cafes in Southeast Asia, we don't really do much follow-up because there is no need, because the participants who come together are the ones that take off and do the projects that they decide to do. When they meet each other at our cafe, they take it off, and then we can come and support. So we see ourselves a bit as a catalyst in sort of supporting these projects. And our vision is always to try and reduce the inequality when it comes to access to justice in the areas that we work.
Maybe one final question, Hannah, is around just, you know, what is the trend that you're seeing in terms of pressure on you know, independent judiciary in certain markets around the world? I know, for example, we have a presence in Malaysia, and there has been a major change in the government there, and things have eased, but maybe in other parts of the world, it's harder to ensure the uses of an independent judiciary as a balance to other state actors to ensure that indeed, as you said, that tenet, that pillar of the rule of law of access to remedy, you know, legal access, is maintained for all citizens, not just those who can afford it.
I think it's hard. When I talk about the definition of rule of law and I talk about the 4 components, it doesn't quite sum up what I think the rule of law is. What I think the rule of law really is that it's social infrastructure. You know, it's something that we have to build, actively build, like it just doesn't happen overnight. And it's something that has to be maintained. And that's the case with an independent judiciary or any of the sort of components of a justice system. It has to be built, it has to be maintained, and it takes resources to be able to do that. And I think it is hard to maintain that if there's not enough resources that are being pumped into that, if there's not enough political will to maintain an independent judiciary. You know, the judiciary can be seen sometimes as a blocker of, you know, certain stakeholders may have a certain vision of what they want to achieve, and the judiciary may come in and block that. And that can be a point of frustration. And if these particular stakeholders become more powerful and are able to erode the judiciary, then that becomes a cause for concern. So I think there is a lot of pressure put on judiciaries, increasingly so. And it's something that I think we all have to stand guard against, especially members of the legal profession. It's something that we have to continually keep a lookout for and maintain these institutions to ensure that they don't erode, essentially.
And I think Wansu did a great job showing us how sustainable cities were a hub for all of the other SDGs. Mm-hmm. And I know we have a number of colleagues within LexisNexis Legal and Professional who are really passionate about articulating if you don't have the rule of law as the framework, as you said, as that kind of operating environment, then you really can't have a sustainable city because you might not be able to enforce land rights, you're going to have corruption, which is rife, you're not going to have contract protection, et cetera, all of which a good functioning city or indeed any community actually needs.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I totally agree. And actually, I was thinking during Mr. Kim's presentation that actually maybe the focus needs to be on sustainable communities and not just sustainable cities, especially if we're looking at moving towards smaller cities. But each small city is probably not going to exist independently on its own. It's not going to be an island. It's going to have intercity connections and intercity relationships and sort of trade and commerce, communication. So I expect to see an evolving need, or the legal issues that will arise from the development of sustainable cities and communities. The legal questions and the legal problems that will arise will continually change. And we're always going to have to innovate, even from what kind of legal solutions do we find to solve problems? Do we need a new legal framework entirely? Especially if cities become smart. We talked a lot about technology. When we use data, when we use technology to be able to solve some of our problems, what are the new legal problems that come out from the use of technology? Privacy, data security. These are questions that may be unique to a city, and at which point we need to start thinking about how do we solve these problems from a legal perspective.
Well, before I ask you to join me in thanking Hannah, I just want to point out that on the SDG Inspiration Day website, you can see Hannah's distinguished biography, as well as the biography of all of our speakers and presenters today, and including our next speaker, who is Mr. Agrawal from the World Resources Institute. Again, Hannah, thank you very much. It was really fascinating to hear about just how essential the rule of law is to sustainable cities and more.
Thank you. And if you have any questions, we can hang out for drinks later.
Maybe, I think Helen will tell us if we have time for a question.
We could take a couple of questions.
Maybe two.
I mean, if there are any. If not, we can. Okay, I guess there's a question.
There's a microphone coming, and don't forget to introduce yourself.
Okay. So my name is Anis. I'm from Siemens. My question to you is, although you discussed from a geography point of view, mainly the Southeast Asia, but since this is related to Sustainable Development Goal number 16 primarily. So one is, how do we, as those who work towards SDG, how do we relate SDG 16 with all the other SDG components? Sometimes it looks like this is something different from the expectation of the other goals.
Yeah.
That is one thing. Second thing, the way the geopolitics is happening across, don't you think that that although we may achieve good health education, the targets under that, but the targets under goal number 16 may go down, may become weaker. Is that a possibility also?
Well, I mean, I guess you can always see, the answer is yes, that is a possibility. To answer your second question, it's funny, I was talking to the director of the World Justice Project, who collates rule of law perception data, and he was saying that the Philippine government has actually increased 3 steps on sort of, rule of law, notwithstanding, they've had some very interesting arrangements over the past couple of years, but they've improved. So on one end, another point that the director was making was that they've seen a decrease in corruption, but an increase in unfettered government powers. So there are different components to I guess sort of access to justice and rule of law, and they may increase or decrease depending on which way sort of the effort is applied and how we progress. Certainly a lot of other goals get precedence, right? Like healthcare, education, hunger, like these things are very primal, right? It's right in front of you, you're hungry, you want it now. In strong institutions and peace and justice may take a secondary backseat, and that's understandable. There's a limited number of resources. It's difficult to prioritize sometimes. But I think one of the key points that links goal number 16 with all the others, including the one on sustainable cities, is that at the end of the day, in order to achieve scale, you need strong institutions. So as Mr. Kim pointed out in his presentation, that while in the past it was individuals that was coming up with brilliant products and ideas like Einstein, today they are amplified and scaled up with organizations and institutions. So I think in order for us to achieve success on all these goals at a global scale, you will need strong institutions to back that up, and that's goal number 16.
And maybe one more question? Yes, sir. Mike is coming. Don't forget to introduce yourself.
Thank you, madam, for your excellent presence. See, there is a deficit, knowledge gap between India and Myanmar. Not many tourists visit India, and then Indian tourists visit Myanmar. No, shortly, the Myanmar will be connected through land route from Manipur. Now, my question to you is that India and Myanmar, they are facing similar problem, whether it's a cultural, economic, and SDG. Is there any possibility between the two governments that the NGOs who are working in Myanmar, they should visit successful NGOs who are working in different areas in large country, and vice versa, so that there should be a knowledge change. Some good thing being done there should be replicated here, and similarly, good thing. India is in certain areas is number one in the world in the technology, IT, and other intervention. So, what is your thought about it?
Oh, I absolutely agree. I mean, India and Myanmar, I'm sure all of you know, share a very long history together, starting with the colonial era when Myanmar was governed as a province of India. So a lot of the institutions are very similar. A lot of the laws came from India. I remember when I was practicing in Myanmar, I would always refer to Indian cases and Indian laws and statutes to interpret Myanmar law because there was just so much shared history there. So I think definitely from a contextual perspective, there's definitely a lot of, positivity that you can get from cross-sharing, because I think a lot of things will be quite easily applicable, especially in the urban and city contexts, because I can imagine that a lot of the city planning that was done back during the colonial times would have been quite similar, given that it was all governed under Kolkata back then when the British were around. So yeah, I think it would be great for knowledge sharing to happen between the two countries.
Okay, and now an official thank you.
Thank
to the
you.
panel. Thank you.